Welcome everybody. Really good to see you here at the Race Equality webinar on behalf of NHS providers. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Sim Scavatsa. I'm your chair for this session today, and I am a non-exec director at Imperial College Healthcare Trust and London North West University Healthcare Trust, which forms part of the North West London Acute Provider Collaborative. And for my sins, I'm also the deputy chair of the BOB ICB, so that's Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West ICB. So welcome to this really important session today run by NHS providers. So I'd just like to welcome our speakers today. We've got an interesting session. We've got a deep dive on talking about race, on trying to really encourage the conversation and move the agenda on. So we've got a series of very special and eminent guests to speak to you about their experience and what they found useful in trying to move this dial forward. What we're going to do is ask them to talk about what they've been able to achieve, and you'll have a great opportunity then to ask questions either through the chat or yourself actually showing your face and asking the question live. But I think it's really important to ask as many questions as possible. Now, the other thing that we really want to encourage today is a sharing of best practice, understanding where you have felt you've made a difference at board level or below, some of the things that you've done. We're really conscious that this conversation and this agenda cannot be driven by ethnic minority staff alone. So we're really looking to investigate what does it mean by white allyship. So without further ado, I would just like to remind you that this session is being recorded and we'll be able to send you a copy of this afterwards and all of the questions. And we'll also signpost you as well. So please keep your cameras and your microphones mute whilst the speakers are speaking. Please use the chat box. We'll really try and pick up on most of those questions as they come in. Any unanswered questions, we'll take those away and then we'll come back to you after the event and be able to ask those of the panel members, and we'll come back to you so nothing is left unsaid. You'll also receive a link at the end as an evaluation, and that will form your thinking about the session. Please take time to complete it. It's really useful because then we can shape any further sessions. We really do appreciate your feedback. This is how things become better, more efficient and sharper. So thank you. Okay, moving on. So I'm honoured actually to be able to introduce our guest today. So we have speaking to you today Tanya Carter, who's Chief People Officer at East London and NHS Foundation Trust. We welcome back to this session actually Eniola Oladipo, Head of Support and Transformation, and Kath Byford, who's Deputy Chief Executive Officer and Chief People Officer at Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, and our very own Paul Devlin, who's Chair of Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. So welcome. As I say, we're going to ask each speaker to share some slides and some thoughts for about 10 minutes, around 10 minutes. We'll listen to them all, and then you'll be thinking about all those fantastic questions that we can really put into the discussion and get thinking about. So thank you. Over to Tanya. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. So as Sim said, I'm Tanya Carter and I'm the Chief People Officer for East London Foundation Trust, and I'm also the co-chair of the London HR Director Network. So I'll be speaking to you for about 10 minutes, and I just want to share a bit about my personal journey, but also the work that my trust has been doing on this agenda. Can we go to the first slide, please? Thank you. So I thought I would start with this slide because I think it's really something to say I work for one of the most diverse boards in the NHS. And I just thought I would show you illustratively. So this is the trust board, and we are currently, the executive team are currently 60% Black, Asian, minority and ethnic groups. Similarly, the board as a whole is 50% BME, and also our NED population is 35.5% BME. So I think that sets a real foundation. But I think before I go on, just to say that East London Foundation Trust is a mental health trust that provides community and primary care. We have about 7,500 staff, and we provide services across North East London and also Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes. So that's just a bit of context in terms of our size. I guess the main thought is around us as a board and what makes us effective and impactful. For me, it's the conversations that we have, both as an executive team and as a board as a whole. So the conversations that we have, the challenge that we give each other, and the ability to apply the lens of race and EDI, to every conversation. I think we had always been quite advanced on this agenda. And what helped was, obviously, during the COVID pandemic, we saw the disproportionate impacts on BAME communities. And then not long after that, we then had the murder of George Floyd. And so for us, that helped to kind of expedite and galvanize those conversations that we were having as a trust. And so we created those safe spaces for people to come and talk about their experiences. We were really keen to encourage staff to listen with fascination and to listen to understand, and not listen to, challenge and question people's experience. We were also mindful about, each time we get someone to tell their stories, we are re-traumatizing them. And what are we actually going to do with that information? I think as a woman of colour, as a Black woman leading some of this work, it's been really challenging. I think, number one, to kind of to champion a protected characteristic that you belong to, because, personally, I was always mindful about, how is this being perceived? Do people think I'm just doing this because I belong to this group? And so there was a tension, and it became hard. And also, I think, where colleagues might have felt uncomfortable in this space, I think there was an automatic assumption that if you were from a Black, Asian or minority group, you'd be comfortable automatically talking about, race. And I also identified this with HR. So when we were increasingly called upon to visit teams, to talk about and lead and kind of shepherd conversations about race, my HR colleagues were also not comfortable in this area. And so one of the key learning for us as an executive and as a board was, to be uncomfortable in this space, and that we would become comfortable as we keep the conversations going. A key part of the work that, a lot of what we've done on this agenda started at board level. So there were lots of conversations. This diverse group were asked to share their experiences. And one of the things that we found in ELF, storytelling really works. And so if you are oblivious or not close to issues of race and racism and discrimination, to hear those stories from people that you know and like and work with every day was really powerful. And the board is no different. I think some board colleagues were quite surprised when we talked about our personal experiences, the daily issues in life generally, and the experiences that we endure, the discrimination, the microaggressions. And so to talk about some of that to our colleagues, our peers, was also truly powerful. We spent a lot of time discussing privilege, which, when we started those conversations, was offensive to many. But what we did is we spent time to explain what we meant, and simply, this privilege is around, the colour of your skin not being the barrier to achieving opportunities. And I think once we got over that education and explanation, it helped us to move forward. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in the wake of George Floyd, and at that time, us, like many trusts, didn't know what to do, and so for a moment we waited, because we wanted to do the right thing and we wanted to understand what that thing was. Meanwhile, lots of other trusts and lots of other organisations put statements out to say, we are an anti-racist organisation. And we didn't feel that we could do that. We felt that it was more than just putting out a statement. We felt that, there was work that we had to do first to be able to get to the point of a statement. And we wanted to be clear what that was. And so one of the tangible things that we did, we partnered with an organization called FLAIR, and we rolled out a survey tool that was specifically about race, and we called it Race in the Workplace. And this survey focused on racial bias, racist behaviours, racial awareness, and racial inclusion barriers. And so this was a survey that we sent to the entire organisation because we wanted to get a sense of where we were. And so this is just one of the dashboards that we received. So there were a series of questions that were multiple choice, and the questions were quite hard. There was one that was, what the last time you observed, a racist slur, what did you do? And then it gave you the four options to choose. And so I picked this dashboard only because it showed us at a glance where we are performing above the benchmark and where we are not. And so at a glance, as a trust, we are performing really well in terms of responding to racial discrimination, identifying it, challenging it, and addressing it. Where we're not progressing well is in terms of how we respond to racial microaggressions, how we respond to racial harassment, and how we manage racist microaggressions that are witnessed, and also racial discrimination that is witnessed. And so for me, it was really important, as one of the leads for this work, was around, how do we understand where we are? What do our staff think, and what are they experiencing? And how will this then impact the work that we're doing going forward? I think my reflection is, in the NHS, it's really easy to put together an action plan, and it's really easy to ask for more data. And I think we have enough data, but I wanted to look at where we can focus. What evidence do I have that will, encourage staff that, we are addressing this? And so if we could go to the next slide, please. This is an anti-racist continuum that we borrowed from the Institute of Health Improvement, because again, we want to see where we are on this continuum, on this journey to become anti-racist and multicultural. And so you'll see that the spectrum runs from being monocultural to anti-racist and multicultural. This work is hard, and we've been really, we've made a real effort that this work cannot just sit with the people that are from this protected characteristic. It does sit with the board, and it's uncomfortable, and it's absolutely essential to the work that we do. And so this work is now shared. So the executive team and the board are accountable for this work. And there are people that lead the work on a day-to-day. So holding the equality agenda is split between three of the executives. So myself from a staff perspective, the chief nurse and deputy CEO from a service user and patient perspective, and then also our director of integrated care and our other deputy CEO in terms of the population health aspect and our citizens outside of the organisation. And collectively, we kind of lead on this agenda with the support of the other executives. So we are continuing this work, and we are doing lots of board development, particularly around microaggressions and how we further this agenda in terms of becoming an anti-racist and multicultural organisation. I will also say that this work takes time. We've been on this journey for a long time, and the reflections are just, what makes our conversations rich as a board and as an executive team. It's because we can bring our own perspectives, to, in some cases, our lived experience, and the fact that we are representative of our local population. So we do have rich conversations, rich challenge. And I don't feel like, every time I want to say something EDI related, that people, roll their eyes and, here she goes again. We do have those conversations, and I feel safe. We feel safe to be able to bring those challenges. So that's all I've really got to share, and I just hope that this kicks off the conversation, and I look forward to taking part in the Q&A after. Thank you.
That's Great. Thank you very, very much, Tanya. That's really honest and really useful and practical, I'm hoping, for delegates as they look at especially that continuum. So please think of questions, pop them in the box, and we'll go on to our next speaker. Eniola, please.
Thanks, Sim, and amazing work you've done there, Tanya. I see you as a tall act to follow. Hello, everyone. I'm Eniola Oladipo. I'm currently Head of Support and Transformation for the Equality and Inclusion team for NHS England. My work looks towards the 1.34 million people we have in the NHS. I'm pleased to be back here, and so I say thank you for having me. A little bit about the team I work in. We're a tiny team, so if we go to the next slide, please. A very small team within the national EDI team. We're called the Support and Transformation team. As many of you will know, this is about to change from the 1st of April, from when we start the new NHS. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to build on what Tanya's talked about today, using a story I came about last summer. I went to Wales. Beautiful place, amazing people, very warm. I went to one of their museums and I came across this clock. So I've borrowed it from there. I thought I'll tell a story about it. It's a clock that stopped ticking on the 21st of October, 1966. It was found in a very small community in Aberfan. I hope I've said that right. There was an incident, a landslip around a mountainous region. It killed in excess of 100 children and 28 adults. It was a very sad time, as you can imagine. And the last tick on the clock when it stopped is what you see on that clock today. So sometime just before 9:15, the incident happened. The story never ended. It was a race against time to save that community. And a lot of work was done then, still is done, as mining isn't a widely done thing from that time, as many of us know now. The reason I use the story when I talk about this sometimes is it's important for us to see that when the clock stops, it stops for some people. Tanya talked about George Floyd incident. I think there's a closer incident. If we move to the next slide, please. There's a closer incident for us in the NHS, which just happened some 3 years ago. Not very long for those who were close to some of these people. It's one that is easy to push away because it stirs, as I can imagine, uncomfortable experience and feelings within us. But I believe that we must not forget. We must not forget the impact of incidents of inequality, inequity in our NHS. Being anti-racist can mean so many things to so many people. For me, it means not forgetting. It means taking an action to act in time. The only reason we have that clock from Aberfan to talk about today was because someone took an action. When this clock stops ticking for some people, we may not like it, but they may never come out of it. And whilst that's okay, it's important for us to acknowledge that that is the case with them. It's also important for me that when the clock stops ticking for some people, that we support them, we move in. As people moved in Aberfan to support the community, don't stop by saying, oh, sorry, that happened. It's so sad, and then move on. Support people with hope, and in hope that their clock will tick again. For us in the NHS, I see our work in being anti-racist being of many areas. And I speak from a place of advantage, I believe, privilege, because my role allows me to identify those opportunities, but also, more importantly, do something about it. So taking on that privilege, I have started a lot of work, which I'll talk about some of them, particularly for the board audience we have on the call today. If we move to the next slide, please. I think one key thing that I'm going to leave you with in telling the story about the Aberfan clock is that for those of us who are genuinely keen about the topic of inclusion, about the inclusion agenda, it's not so much what we don't do, or what we do that doesn't, that stays with us. In the end, it's those chances that we do not take that stays with us, because we will ask ourselves from time to time, and for as long as it takes, why we didn't do something to help at the moment we had the opportunity. And the opportunity, as it sits with each of us, will be different. I understand, bless her soul, the Queen, the Aberfan disaster was one of the moments she never forgot. It was one of her greatest regrets during her lifetime. I'll talk about a few of the things that I've been doing. My team, I lead a very small but highly efficient team. If we move to the next slide, please, in the NHS. There's a number of work we've been doing, but I want to talk about the work we're doing with staff networks. Earlier this year, this financial year, I instituted a program of work. It had 3 areas to support staff networks. One was looking towards the development of staff networks themselves. Another area towards the wider staff community in the NHS. And the third, select audience, which is where I believe a lot of the work for improving staff experience within the NHS and beyond sit. And this is the board level and senior leader level in NHS. Just last week, one of the interventions I created there, a board masterclass to facilitate opportunities for peer-to-peer learning amongst sponsors who are board level leaders of staff networks. That session unveiled a number of things, and it's built on evidence that we found. It tells us that there's a learning journey that every one of us must take as leaders. And unless we own that journey, we won't move forward from where we are. I'm greatly pleased to say that the people who joined the session, we saw a progressive movement in their journey. At the beginning of the session, we saw about 20%, so 2 out of 10 people saying they're somewhat not comfortable in their understanding of what the role of a staff network sponsor looks like. And in all honesty, no one has taken the time to put anything out there until now. So off the back of the session, we saw a movement as everyone who came off the session saying, actually, I'm clearer in what is expected of me as a sponsor. I understand now how the power dynamic works and where I can bring people in to ensure that decision-making is more inclusive for the organizations I lead, or the organization I lead. And this is a small but important aspect of what I've been doing in my own personal journey as a leader, to understand the experiences of people and understand where I can come in to support, not by being the knight in shining armor, but by being that subtle voice, that person who transfers power, that person who transfers privilege to the people who really desperately need it at that time. There's a number of work elements coming out in the next month or 2. I'll encourage you to look out for 3 of them. The first is the national, the NHS EDI improvement plan. It is a plan that has been co-developed with a number of audiences across the NHS. The second is a repository of support offers for board leaders, for staff networks, for EDI leads, for HROD professionals, for board level sponsors of this agenda and across the NHS. And the fourth is a dashboard that will underpin the accountability for that EDI plan. The plan looks across all 9 protected characteristics, and the aim is that we have a high level of number of actions for organizations to take forward and move forward in our journey towards making our NHS a better place to work. I'll pause there, Sim, because I think my time's just about up. Many thanks.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Eniola. And what's amazing are those 3 pieces of work that are due to come out. So let's make sure that we all have a look at those. 2 things you said to me that were amazing. Take action, have to do something in order to move this agenda along. And hope. You know, we have a beleaguered workforce at the moment, and what we need to provide in terms of encouraging retention of our workforce, of all of our workforce, is hope. And the race equality work, you know, it is something that we can offer up to our people to make them see that we are holding ourselves accountable. So thank you. I'm going to move on now and ask Kath to speak to us. Kath, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sim. I'm Kath Byford, Deputy Chief Exec and Chief People Officer of Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, and that's a mental health trust across the 2 counties of Norfolk and Suffolk. And just a very brief perspective of where we are and where we've been. So NSFT is a trust with a history of yo-yo in between, requires improvement, inadequate over the last 10 years. We're in SOF 4. We're an organised mental health trust and learning disability services in Suffolk, and we have about 5,000 staff, and we cover a large geography that covers rural, urban, coastal, deprived, affluence. We have the full mix completely. We're not a diverse population in terms of the ethnicity across the 2 counties, and what we do have is what I would say a population where we have got cultural challenges, particularly racism, whether it be explicit racism or a bias in our population based on the demographics within our system. If you can go to the next slide, please, Joe. I only have 1 slide. This really is about the story. I joined the trust back last May, so I've been in the organisation about 10 months. And it was really clear in the trust that we have got a significant problem with a number of different challenges regarding culture, but racism being one very much so. And one of the questions, you know, I thought to myself is how we unearth the problems. But the issue is the problem was always there, and it was noted. There's multiple data sources which tell us what our challenges are within the organisation, have been for a number of years. It just wasn't seen. You know, there was always the death by action plan from staff surveys, the WRES surveys, etc. The trust did a bullying and harassment review. CQC kept telling us we had major culture problems. But actually what the case was, we didn't unearth it. We just chose last year to actually really expose it and challenge the position that we are within an organisation, because frankly, it was always there and it was always noted. There wasn't the strategic commitment, there wasn't the investment, and there was just this focus on firefighting, which on the basis of our CQC position. And there was also a culture in the organisation, which from the leadership perspective, if you say things are good often enough and with authority, people will believe it, and that is not the case, clearly, and culture being one of those major problems. So I came into the organisation 10 months ago in a brand new role with a completely fresh pair of eyes, and basically exposed the gap in our actions through opportunistic approaches. So the data, as I say, was there. I don't need to go through it. I'm sure you can imagine in terms of the data in relation to disciplinaries, people being suspended, bullying and harassment from service users or families, but also through management. And what I found really was this normalised behaviour within the organisation, where it was acceptable for people to experience abuse, particularly racial abuse, whether it be from colleagues or from service users. and the practices in the organisation being really quite unfair. So if I look at recruitment practices, for example, an inherent unfair approach to recruitment enables bias and discrimination when it comes to appointments of people, particularly of colour, into posts within the organisation. So some really deep-seated cultural problems. And in terms of what happened at board level, because I think this is really about the experience of NSFT over the last 10 months. One of the things that I haven't come here to tell you how we fixed the problem. I think the message and the experience so far has been about exposing and owning and naming the problem within our organisation with our culture. So I joined, as I said, in May. By September, in our board in public, we were presenting all of this known data in a way that explicitly called out our cultural problems, including racism within the organisation, as I say, in public, without any attempt to temper the language or without any attempts to try and sugarcoat what was going on in the organisation. And we took an approach that if you don't call it out, name it, and take responsibility for it, you cannot possibly fix it through action plans. You know, we were already signed up to 2 different anti-racist strategies and commitments within the organisation. And it doesn't mean anything unless you actually go on record publicly and say, this is our problem, this is our challenge, and it is unacceptable, and we are not allowing it to be swept under the carpet for any longer. And it was really important for us as a board to have humility and accepting where we'd got it wrong in the past, even though many of the board weren't around for the last however many years, but we are the leadership in the organisation, and it really is down to us to take responsibility. And part of that was about our own capability as a board, with so much change and turnover as a result of the organisational challenges. We took the approach whereby by calling out and naming it and showing what we hadn't addressed, we therefore as a board needed to be supported in that progress. So we touched base and drew in Roger Klein, who I think everybody will know about, and we invited him to come and do some board development sessions for us, which have taken place, and it's been found to be really insightful. And the thing that I'm really proud of at board level is sometimes as I said, the issue is about wanting to make things sound or appear better than they are, but there was a complete commitment to just exposing our problems, taking us back down to the rawness of our challenges, and using that as the platform for improvement. So in terms of building the trust with staff so that they open up and talk about this, you know, this is just where we are at the start of our journey. So we have done a lot, don't get me wrong, but you cannot possibly expect for all of this to be transformed really quickly. But I just thought I would share with you some of the things that we are doing and have done, and the direction we're going. So the first thing, actually, we transformed our induction programme, and that was about how we welcome people into the organisation. But on day one, at every single induction that's taken place since July, myself or Stuart, the chief exec, talk to the group, and we tell them on day one where our problems are with our culture, because we have to be honest and authentic from the very first day people join our organisation, and tell them the problems, and we name them. We name racism, we name misogyny, we name homophobia, and we name our clique culture where you have to be in the in crowd to get ahead. We name that, and that's on the basis of honesty and trust, but also in order to tell people from day one that this is not accepted practice, and that they really have an opportunity to speak up. And if that means coming to me directly, then that's what they do. And in fact, that's what people do. And I'm really pleased about that. We've done lots of work in terms of, we've created the Big Conversation culture improvement programme. We've recruited a new director of culture and a director of people. And some of you may know of Harpreet Hockley. She is now, as of last Monday, our director of culture and OD. And we recruited Catherine Castleton as our director of people. So it's about bringing expertise and showing we mean business into the organisation, and those people having real credibility. We've also we commissioned an independent external guardian service because of a lack of trust in our organisation, and people are speaking up through the guardian service because they feel safe to do so about issues regarding culture and in particular racism. And we're just really trying to show that we mean business, and this is not just talk, it is translating into action. I think, thinking about time, I just wanted to sort of mention, when I say a little bit about me. So I'm a white woman, and I have never professed to be an expert in culture or in any of the technicalities behind about culture. I think for me, I'm a person in a position of influence within an organisation where people hadn't necessarily recognised the need to speak up before. And hence I've surrounded myself, I've created a team of people who are experts in their field. And my job is to be that person of influence with a mouth, and to be an ally, to not expect to be the person who knows the answer to everything, but to listen, hear, be approachable, and be a driving force in our organisation, particularly at board level, to maintain the commitment to actually, this is not good enough. It's not good enough for our people, and it's not good enough for our service users. And that has to be the way in which we take it forward. All of the rest of it, the action plans in this organisation have been done, but never before has that ownership and commitment been in place. And so that's the story I wanted to talk to you about today, just to share that journey over the last 10 months and the impact that that's having on the organisation, but without any delusions that this is going to be transformed rapidly. We've still got a long journey ahead. So I'll stop there. I'm conscious of time, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you for your honesty and your preparedness to share with us all and everyone on this call your sort of personal aha moment and the way that you're sort of taking on that white allyship role. So I just would encourage everyone, please, to continue to put questions, observations, thoughts into the chat box so that we can have a really good discussion afterwards. Now I'd just like to present Paul Devlin, who's our last speaker on this topic, and then we'll get down to business after Paul has finished. So thanks, Paul.
Great, thanks ever so much, Sim. Real pleasure being on a session with yourself, Tanya, Eliola, and Kath as well. And I think there's a few things that I'm saying which I'm very pleased link in with some of the pieces that colleagues have already fed in. So I've basically got 3 slides of content that I wanted to talk about. If I can move to my first one, please, colleagues. So just picking up that last piece from Kath, I really wanted to begin by just doing a little bit of reflecting personally myself. I think this is a really, really important thing for us to do. Obviously, I'm coming at this work as a white ally, and I think it's really important that I reflect on what allyship means to me and why it actually matters. And as I was thinking about this, certainly for me, my personal history, my childhood, much of my schooling was in Leicester. I was brought up in Leicester, particularly in the late 70s and then into the early 80s. I had my first work role in a further education college in Leicester as well. And what was particular around my experience in Leicester was the response of Leicester as a city to Idi Amin's expulsions from Uganda of Asian people. And I had many school friends, colleagues, peers who were part of families that had been expelled from Uganda. And that was a very early piece for me, and really gave me an opportunity to listen into, explore and hear from lived experience from others around me. I think one of the other things for me is recognizing that I've been lucky enough to have some roles with influence and responsibility. So prior to my NHS work, working in national third sector organizations in strategic leadership roles with a responsibility strategically around equalities and diversity. And that brought a level of responsibility, but also influence. And similarly, in terms of my board level experience at a strategic health authority and chair at 2 trusts now, it's been an important piece. I'll explain my understanding and why this matters in a couple of minutes. I think also it's really important, colleagues have referenced this already, that we recognise some of that more recent context that I think has enabled us in the NHS to actually make some shifts that have been considered and perhaps not acted on for many, many years. I think the murder of George Floyd, as colleagues have referenced, was a really important one. Kath talked about the naming importance, and there was an interesting experience for me and the chief exec at my trust, where in the immediate aftermath to the murder of George Floyd, we wanted, as other trusts did, to put a message out to our staff. And we'd drafted something, myself and the chief exec had done a draft that obviously referenced the murder of George Floyd. And we did actually have a couple of voices saying to us, oh, you know, are you sure you want to use the murder word? Because, you know, nothing's been proven yet. And I was both horrified, thinking, hang on a minute, I watched that video. You know, that I don't need a court to tell me what happened there, but also was reflecting then on that's a really interesting piece around the importance of our language and actually naming racism, naming a murder like that. The pandemic impact has been talked about already, was a really important piece for us. WRES, the Workforce Race Equality Standards, very important. I'd bring it up to much more recent times. Actually, the dreadful Employment Tribunal result that NHS England had, which was rightly what was needed for Michelle Cox to get at least some sense of justice for the racist experiences that she'd had being an NHS employee. I think there were a lot of lessons from that, and if you've not done already at board level, I'd really encourage boards to be reflecting on, okay, what does that actually mean for us? Because there's a massive potential in that of things that we need to then reflect on together. So if I move to my next slide then, actually thinking a little bit about what as allies I think we need to do. I should just preface this. This is about me and my approach. And you know, I'm not presenting this as a great theoretical approach. I'm not saying, you know, that this is somehow the best way of doing it. It's what I aspire to and try to work to myself. I think first and foremost, as allies, we need to own this work and actually take our responsibility. So for me, a key piece for me as a trust chair is that enabling my organisation to be anti-racist is my job, full stop. So that's a part of what I need to take on and really own. I think as allies, it's really important that we recognise and then use the power and indeed privilege that we have got. I mentioned that I've been lucky enough to be a chair. I was chair at Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust for 6 years. I've just entered my second 3-year term at Nottinghamshire Healthcare. We need to recognise, particularly those of us who are around board tables, we do have power. And we should be able to use that and use that proactively, decisively to actually drive anti-racism, to change things that need changing, and to really bring that power to bear. One example for me is also recognizing I spend a lot of time doing developmental work with groups and individuals. So a key piece for me is being able to offer up to a number of people within organizations and indeed elsewhere in terms of my BAME colleagues, mentoring, coaching, really thinking about how to engage and develop within the NHS, because that's a part of the knowledge base that I can bring. we ought to take responsibility for building our knowledge. I think it's one of those pieces. Tanya said we've got enough data already. We absolutely do, and I get that for some people there is a sense of, oh, I don't quite know enough. Well, my take for allies is get on and find out. This is not difficult. I Googled the phrase being a good white ally. There are 258 million results that sit with that. You know, there's shed loads out there. There's shed loads of really good guidance, support, advice. Really get on and use it. I think our staff network's massively important. It's not their job to fix things. We need to work alongside them, and we need to remember the racism that's experienced by our patients and also occasionally can be experienced by our staff from our patients. And if I could flip to my last full slide, please. For me, last 2 minutes, it's really, really important to take action. And for me, the first action is self-awareness. So these are some questions that I think are really helpful. Again, there will be others, but actually saying, why does this matter to me? And really exploring that. If you can't answer that, you're not going to be a good ally. Where is my power and how will I use it? Absolutely critical. A great example for me in my current trust, when I joined, the board was all white. Our board now is 1/3 Black, Asian, and part of that didn't happen by luck. Some of that is very deliberate. For example, redesigning our non-executive director roles to include a responsibility about enabling boards to drive equality, diversity, including anti-racism work. Not about saying you must have lived experience, though that obviously is very, very valuable. It's actually about saying, help us do the job that we need to do. The piece about knowledge gaps and how I will fill them, I've mentioned already. And the piece about data, actually for me, the question is not just the fact, obviously we've got a load of data, we don't need to ask for more. Asking the question about what is it I know already that I've yet to actually learn and act on, because it's the learning and acting on that is absolutely critical for me. Okay, I'm going to stop at that point, Sim, and let you steer us into some questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for that very personal approach, sharing out your personal approach and insight into this. And this isn't easy work, and it's like anything, it takes practice. So listen, before we open up to questions from our attendees, please can I ask the panel, having heard each other speak now, is there anything else you want to add before you start answering any questions? Any thoughts that came to mind or anything that you want to pick up on? No? Excellent. Let's get down to it then. So let's start with a wonderful question actually that's just come in on the chat box, and I'm going to ask you all to think about this. And Emma Silva says that if you were on an interview panel for a new trust chair, what one question might you ask? What one question might you ask if you were on the interview panel for any new trust chair? Does anybody want to have a go at that, first of all? Tanya, brilliant.
So my question would be, can you give an example of where you have personally had an impact on the progression of the EDI agenda for an organisation?
Brilliant. Personal accountability practice. Paul.
Absolutely echo that. I was in the same mind about what have you actually done to change something, to getting to the action piece and getting beyond the good words. And it's, you know, we know that in an interview setting, it can be quite easy to come up with the right sounding kinds of words. Let's get to some real action and impact.
Brilliant, thank you. Kath.
Thank you. I think a part two to the questions that have already been asked, I would then extend that within my trust to say, what will you do to improve the diversity on the board as is? bearing in mind we have one person of colour on our entire board.
Excellent, thank you. Eniola, do you have any thoughts?
Really good questions. I like the fact that it punches in on action that's been done and also forward-looking, adding to Kat's point. So nothing to add. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Forward-looking. It's a constant. It's a constant job. It doesn't stop. It needs iterating. Brilliant. Thank you, panel. And just before we ask for any hands up, another question, please. Just all of you to have a think about this. How do you hold yourself and colleagues on your board to account for the progress and the work against the kind of the commitments that your trust and your board have made on race equality? So how do you hold yourself and your colleagues to account? Because accountability are the teeth we need to make sure we drive the agenda forward. And perhaps that's been lacking somewhat, or not as strong as it could have been. So any thoughts on that, panel? I can see Kath nodding her head. Kath, do you want to have a bash at that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're in the early stages, as I described in our journey. So in terms of, I think, progress, it's really hard at the moment to hold the board to account for progress when we've only just really started working very actively on it. But the way I make sure that the board remains accountable is by talking about it constantly and regularly in terms of the culture in our organisation, and reminding of the explicit and specific issues that we have. So for me, I'm not yet in a position to hold the board colleagues to account for progress, but it's to make sure that it wasn't a flash in the pan back last September, that this is at the top of our radar all of the time. So that would be my response, Sim.
Brilliant, thank you. Anybody else would like to comment?
Shall I come in?
Tanya, please.
Or maybe I'll go after Tanya.
Oh no, Eniola, please come in, and then we'll get Tanya.
Although I do not work in a trust at the moment, I think in addition to what Kath said, there's something for me about the tools that I provide to enable that accountability. I mentioned the dashboard earlier on. I think in the NHS we're fond of policies and talking about things, but if we do not create those tools, those levers, if you like, that enable, underpin accountability against those policies or standards we've set, we will not move forward. So for me, it's about creating those framework, could be systems, could be tools, that enables that open. I'm very big on open, transparent accountability. So it's not just one-to-one, it's system accountability. Peers can see how they're performing against agreed standards or policies. So it's that openness, using levers, systems that are available to make that happen.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Can I just ask colleagues, please, attendees on the call, please turn on your cameras so that we can see some wonderful faces and let the panel see who they're talking to. There are so many of you that have joined, so that would be wonderful. Please, I can see Jagtar, but I can't see anybody else. It would be wonderful to see you all and just see how you're reacting. That's excellent. Paul, did you want to have a go at the accountability question?
I think Tanya was about to come in, wasn't she?
Tanya, you were.
That's okay, thank you. So for me, there's a number of things. I feel like as an organisation and as an organisation, as a board, as an individual, there's something about a bravery and a boldness. And for me, that bravery is how you put your head above the parapet and say those unpopular things, because someone has to, and around how do you, even on a one-to-one, we address this stuff one uncomfortable conversation at a time. There's something about the language, being quite deliberate with language. And I just think back to the whole white privilege, white fragility conversation. Comms tried to deter us. Oh, are you sure you want to use that term? How about, it's like, no, we're going to say what it is. And for me, and I talked earlier about, being the one. And so I drafted the comms have challenged it. And I thought, oh, let me check. So I went back to my CEO, I was like, look, this is what I think. But comms are saying, you know, how do you feel? And he goes, no, we're going to say what it is. So I think there's a bravery and a boldness around saying what needs to be said, and that explanation, naming it. And for me, there's something around, as a unitary board, we're collectively responsible. And I've many a times have said to my peers, I know I'm the chief people officer, but I can't do this on my own. This is around how we do this together.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tanya. Like that courage. Paul.
Yeah, just the only bit that I'd add, that as an ally, for me, part of it is reflecting on: am I driving? Am I bringing stuff in? Am I raising the issues, or am I waiting for my Black Asian colleagues to raise the issues? So for example, I mentioned the Michelle Cox case. You know, for me, actually, as soon as I'd got hold of the full judgment of that, me sharing that with my non-exec colleagues, I knew the execs had seen it, saying we need to understand this. We need to start reflecting on how much of this applies to us and our trust, and what we're going to do to make sure that we understand that. You know, it's that type of drive bit. And the other piece for me is having key colleagues who I can check with, who I know won't be afraid to tell me when I ain't doing enough.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. I just bring up something Tanya said about language. Part of the education and the knowledge gap that our panel members have spoken about is just keeping up with the subtle changes in language. So, for example, you have heard the debate between using sort of inequality or sort of equality and equity. So it's important really to keep asking, keep checking in with the latest thinking as language very carefully changes. The other point that Tanya made was about clarity. It's so important to be absolutely clear. What do we mean? What impact do we want to have on our staff? So really to take that away and back to your trusts. I am going to put a question, please, to Eniola. A question has come through from Maria Clement, and she wants to know, with regards to the dashboard that's going to be coming out, what, if any, are the consequences of, well, for trusts that don't benchmark well? What will happen? We're back to the accountability. What will happen in that instance?
A really good question, Mary. Thank you for asking. This is another area that we haven't done very well in as an organization, and I'm speaking across board generally. I believe currently, and this is me speaking openly, the first step is to get people to embrace this open and transparent style of accountability. This isn't something that currently, when it comes to matters relating to inclusion in the NHS, that we used to. In spite of having the workforce race equality standards and the workforce disability equality standards, we still are away from people openly discussing and holding each other to account. Now, I believe in the first couple of years, that's going to be the battle that must be won. We will then come to that point where we will say, so what? Where people are not doing what they should do, or benchmarking, as it's been said, although I don't like the term benchmarking when it comes to inclusion, because by principle, you're talking about difference, yet we're talking about benchmarking. So there's something about how we measure, I would say, progress. So there'll be difference, but it's the progressive journey in the continuous improvement that I'm particular about. So I think a lot of that consequence that you're asking would sit with systems. I believe with the new operating framework for the NHS, a role has to sit with boards, so integrated care boards and systems, for what they will do within the ecosystems that sit within those organizations that they're looking after, to say, if we're suffering in this area, we know the impact it's costing us. Over the last couple of years, we've seen what it's done. How do we want to deal with this issue going forward? And some of it will be strange because we're not used to it again in the NHS. But I think it only takes one of us here who's on the board of one of those ICBs to take action, and we'll see others start to take it as well. The power sits with us at that board system level with this dashboard. It's no longer a national holding systems to account. It's system to system, peer to peer accountability that we're driving for. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Very clear. Thank you, Eniola. I'm going to bring in Jagtar, who's had his hand up for quite some time. So apologies, Jagtar, please ask away.
So I wanted to make a comment as well as some questions quickly. You recently challenged me to ask me what's my one big idea, and we produced a podcast for NHS providers on that. And that links to the question about what question do you ask a new appointee. But also, I'm giving no secrets away. I'm a CQC inspector. I also ask the question in CQC inspections. So here's the question. What do you understand by inequality? I'm now expecting an answer. Inequalities are avoidable and preventable for staff and for patients. If they don't give me the twin answer, they don't get it. The next question is, tell me one thing you've done to improve inequalities for staff or for patients. And that's where most people fail. Even when you give them the definition, people in very, very senior posts cannot point to one thing they've improved in inequality. The next area I was going to cover very quickly, right now, the police and fire are also grappling with this issue of cultural change. And what I've heard today, and I'm going to invite you all now to the APNA conference, and I mean this genuinely, we're going to have an APNA conference in September, we're going to have a workshop, and I want it to run like this, because this has been amazing. You haven't talked theory to us, you've told us practical things you've done. The other day I was on ICB board and all I got was theory of inequality, health inequalities, not one practical example. You've given practical examples. So don't change anything because of what I'm saying. So the fire service has been looking at cultural change. And this is the bit I'd like to just add value to where you've been talking about the issues you've been dealing with. So where do we look for more effort, more actions? Politically, well, we're not going to get that because the Tories are the most diverse cabinet we've ever had, the most toxic on this particular topic. But if you don't have air cover from politics, it reduces your impact and power. Then you look at NHSEI. Here again, we're looking to see that Navrina Evans is actually cutting some of the budgets, but there's a genuine reason for that. So we've got to see how can we support Navrina in maintaining the agenda. Then you've got the regions. Are all regions and NHSEI equally focused on this and delivering on this, and can we hold them to account? Then you got individual trusts, and we've got some great examples from Paul and from Norfolk, what things are actually happening at the trust board. The bit we didn't cover is what's the role of middle managers and what's the role of staff. And here is where I think the big issues lie. If the top 4 or 5 things I mentioned are leadership, the bit that really we've struggled with is the role of bystanders, the role of staff, the role of managers, what to do. And I really like that continuum that you showed earlier, because that shows it. And one other element that we do fail on in the public sector is the trade unions. The trade unions do not support us as well as we'd like. Often, the trade union will defend the absolutely undefendable or not give support to our BME staff when they need that support. And the accountability bit, I think, is, for me, has always been easy. We all are accountable under the 2010 Equality Act, our public sector equality duty. What doesn't happen is we're not held to account on our public sector equality duty by our trade unions, by our staff, and by our patients. The next bit is the tools, and this is why I've asked for an early sight of the dashboard. I'm hoping to set our dashboard as public sector equality duty. What are we doing? What actions? What are we improving? The WRES, what are we doing? What are we improving? The WRES, what are we doing? What are we improving? The gender pay gap, the EDS 2022, which has got 3 clear parameters to measure and improve, and then finally the 20+5. That's enough dashboards to improve and measure performance on. We will have our dashboard up and ready soon, but I don't want to jump the gun if there's a new one coming that we need to use. That would be my sort of, and the questions I've asked about, what did we learn during COVID? What can we make sure we don't repeat the mistakes is really for maybe another day, and we will be having that as a workshop issue at the next conference. But we do have some stuff from the APNA conference where there was a workshop on what lessons did we learn from COVID. I'm willing to share those with colleagues. But if
thank you, Jagtar. I think that's quite a lot to be taking in at the moment, and brilliantly said. But let's just perhaps take one of the elements that you talked about, which is quite interesting, because obviously we're talking here about board level accountability, but Jenny put in the chat, does anyone have an experience of how they've helped their leadership sort of down through the ranks, the middle managers? How have boards, how have trusts helped middle managers pick up on this agenda and really, really help? Because it's that sticky middle where our colleagues are perhaps suffering from some of those microaggressions. And how have boards, how has anybody here had some experience in making that sort of middle management more aware and take some action? Does anybody have any comment on that? Should we start with Tanya? Thank you.
Thank you, Sim. Thanks, Jagtar. So we've done a lot in this space. So in terms of, continuing on the COVID race and privilege work, we realised that we needed to cascade. So we basically replicate whatever we did at board, we did it at the next levels down. So we have what's called a chief executive discussion group. So that is a meeting that happens every 2 weeks, and that's all our most senior leaders. So we had that conversation. We brought in external support from a human rights charity called BRAP, and we had 4 monthly sessions with that group of people because we needed them to understand and be comfortable with it in order for them to cascade it down. We know that the line managers are key to this, and we all know that people leave managers, not organizations. And so how are we making managers aware of their own leadership behaviors? How are we helping them to address their biases, unconscious or not? But that's a conversation for another day. But how are we addressing that? How are we supporting managers to be the best they can? How are they treating people like people and not trying to treat everyone the same, but trying to embrace difference? And how are they, it's a journey for them when they either perpetuate a microaggression or they're inconsistent with their management, getting them to understand why that is impacting on the problem. And the managers are the people that are making decisions about who's recruited and who's not, and who's being disciplined and who's not. So again, I feel like it's a whole education for them, and it's a journey. And also, how are we as board members exhibiting the behaviors and cultures that we want for them to be able to do the same, because it's all role modeling.
Thank you, Tanya. Paul, what have you done in your trust?
I think I'd say not enough is the start point for me, to be honest. I think this is a challenge across a number of aspects of work that we do in our trusts, where I think that we can often get a really strong understanding of what's happening at the front line, whatever that is for our different services. We can be feeling pretty confident about the conversations we're having as a board, and then realise that actually we've not given the attention, support, resource into a big chunk of our organisation. I think one of the things for me that has worked, and I can't remember who said it in what context, but freedom to speak up has been a really important tool in relation to our middle managers. So I think with freedom to speak up, that's one of those routes where we do have frontline staff being able to speak up sometimes about their experience of more immediate management. And part of the responsiveness around that has sometimes been able to be taking a step back from obviously dealing with the individual circumstance, but actually taking the step back and saying, is there a developmental piece to do with a team, with a group of leaders, with a group of middle managers? But I think it's a really good question to be constantly asking, Jenny. And I think from a board perspective, we can get, I think the risk for us is we get seduced with feeling like, oh, we're talking about this a lot and we're getting on with a lot, so therefore a lot's changing. And actually that's part of that bit for me about asking that so what question and really looking at, are we having any impact? Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. So that's really powerful, actually. Don't get seduced by the list of activities and programs and initiatives that are presented to you. Ask the so what question, because half of them may not be having the impact that they should. So it's, for me, if I think about Jenny's question and what perhaps something that happened at Imperial was focus. There are so many elements to the RES, there's so much data. Ask your teams and as a board decide on the 2 or 3 elements where you want to see the most difference and concentrate on those ruthlessly until you see the impact. Otherwise, the danger is trying to cover too much without enough capacity and not getting any results. And I can't help feeling perhaps this is where we've been for some time. So it's about being brave and picking the 2 to 3 elements that you will be able to create the most impact, and then sharing that with the middle managers who just want to create, I'm sure, the same effect and same positive impact, but to empower them to concentrate on less, especially given the agenda in the NHS at the moment. So I think focus has to be perhaps one of the answers to making that difference and to help the middle management. Brilliant. Kath, did you have any thoughts on your middle managers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was listening to colleagues, it made me think about the fact that in the last 6 months or so, we've very actively recruited people from a background of people of colour. And so in theory, that's great because we're improving our diversity, our ethnicity in regard to senior managers and middle managers within the organisation. And then I just had this moment of fear because the risk is the tokenistic implication potentially, but also what we're exposing the new people in these posts too, in terms of potentially if we haven't changed anything underneath with regard to the culture or indeed anything above, what we're doing is making ourselves look better, but actually potentially putting people at risk as a result of the way in which we are doing that. So it's more a bit of a sort of a red flag for myself actually, is it's not just about people changing our diversity within our middle management and senior management, but actually making sure people are supported and equipped when they're in those new roles.
Brilliant, thank you. Eniola, did you have your hand up as well to comment?
Yes, I'll just throw in a few things, 3. One is around engagement. I've mentioned tools a few times today, put that there as well. And the 3rd is around education. So on engagement, I'm talking about using engagement as a vehicle for change. I've heard of lunch and learn sessions, not the greatest fan of them because I believe lunch should be protected. It's about looking health and well-being as well. But whichever way we can engage with groups of line managers, I think has worked is what we've done. It could be drop-in sessions. I loved what you said about ruthlessly going after the 2-3 things we've prioritized. Those engagement sessions are for sharing best practice. So facilitate that collaborative learning communities with line managers, and as well to enable reflection. So line managers, they're often in the operational zone. They keep going and they never stop oftentimes. So those spaces enable them to stop, pause, reflect on their own leadership practice, And sometimes, depending on how the sessions are done, we've done it in such ways that we enable polling and people to give each other feedback in smaller groups. And those are very rich avenues for them to see themselves in their own practice. Talking about tools, there's a myriad of them that can be put out. But again, it's not about throwing things at people. It's about looking at the 1, 2, 3 things that work well for the situation in our organization. Peer-to-peer learning is what I was talking about primarily when I mentioned training education. So a lot of the learning our line managers have picked up on has come from their own peer, not so much as training we've deployed, but the training they've picked up, education they've picked up from their own colleagues and best practice shared. I'll pause there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Eniola. I'd like to ask a question, please, of attendees and the delegates here. You know, what has worked for you? What's been the most effective way that you've been able to embed the whole accountability for sustaining progress at board level? And that's the thing, it's sustaining the progress. It's not sort of having a big initiative and letting it wilt away, but how do you keep the focus and the pressure on? How have you made sure that that's embedded at board level? Does anyone have any reflections they just want to share with colleagues? I think it's, you know, there are different ways to do things and different things will work for different trusts and at different systems. But if you've had any success or any sort of thoughts and you might want to share with anyone, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Any observations that they want to share with us? Or haven't you been able to do it? That's also something to share as well.
Sim, can I give you 2 quick ones? And I'll be
Yeah.
quick ones. Board diversity. My board was all white and female when I joined. You look at it now, it's the most diverse. Number 2, discipline is toxic and costs a lot of money. We've reduced the number of disciplines by a massive amount, and I know many others have done the same. And I think the patient one is prone restraint. More black men get prone restraint than any other group of men, and there's more likelihood of people dying, and we've reduced that through a focused way of training. So going back to this avoidable and preventable definition, all of those were avoidable and preventable. We keep thinking about what's avoidable, preventable. Why do I say that? It comes from my fire service experience. We used to have 800 deaths a year. We then focus on prevention, and we'll have less than 200 a year now. So if we keep that marmot definition, bring it right down, that's where I think the action will happen.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jagtar. Can I bring Teresa in to share?
Apologies, I've had internet nightmares today. We have started frequent, we're hosting this 6 monthly to make them manageable, but co-produced board development sessions where we actually have an interactive session with the board around our race equity and other issues. And we found it really useful because they're absolutely involved in the process. And it's about actually what does that mean for the board with their in terms of accountability, and it's a great way to keep it on the agenda, can have really open and honest discussions. And we found that that's working really well. And people feel that they understand the work that's actually happening and also the challenges within that, and how collectively and individually the board can support agendas that they are ultimately accountable for. We found that works really well. So watch this space. We'll see. It's quite new.
Brilliant, Teresa. And we'd really like you to come back to another session and just tell us how you found that and what you learned. Because, putting in new initiatives and trying to push something doesn't always come easily. So we really welcome you back again to talk about that.
Thank you. We'd be happy to.
Oh, great. Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to share, how their board has really embedded and sort of encouraged a sustainable way to embed race equality? Anybody else want to share with us? Or any other observations at this point? No? No.
You've got a hand up from Kez.
Oh, yes, I can't see that, but thank you, Paul. Kez, hi.
Yes, hi, thank you for that. Thank you. My name's Kez Hayat and I work at the Bradford Teaching Hospitals. I'm the head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. I've been enrolled for 3 years now within the organisation, and I think there's a key role here for EDI practitioners, because I think our role is about creating that infrastructure really where EDI is discussed, EDI is understood, and there's focus on ownership around EDI. So in my organisation, obviously, being Bradford, we're a very, very diverse city. We have great diversity in our organisation in terms of our workforce representation, and obviously serve quite a wide, diverse population in one of the most deprived inner city areas of Bradford. So diversity, equality, inclusion, tackling health inequality is absolutely paramount. However, one thing that's really allowed us to bring EDI right at top, at board level, has been some of the impact around COVID, and our board sort of really demonstrating their personal commitment to the EDI agenda, which has really helped, and that's resulted in developing an equality diversity council at a very strategic level, which is chaired by the chief executive, and we've got some key representation around that table. But I think this EDI agenda is absolutely about patient care and patient experience. And I think from my experience, when you start talking to middle managers around patient care, they all of a sudden start listening, because that's what they are about, and that's why they are in the NHS. So I think we've got a key role to play in how we empower, and I think it was Tanya who talked about empowerment. One of our strategic objectives around EDI is education, empowerment, and support. I think, you know, we know we've killed people by PowerPoint presentations and talking about the Equality Act in our EDI training. We know it doesn't work. So we need to be creative, we need to be innovative, you know, we need to be good at how we make people uncomfortable in a comfortable kind of a way. And that is a challenge, but I think, you know, we need to shy away from data. You know, we've got enough data, we need action. And I think, you know, bringing it back to my board, we're looking at EDI as a key building block to all of the work that we do. You know, we've got a corporate strategy, and EDI is absolutely weaved into that corporate strategy. And then a dedicated EDI strategy, which is an enabling strategy of the corporate strategy. And I think it really needs to be mainstreamed and embedded at that level with resources and focus where we are actually making an impact, where at the middle management levels, because a lot of the impact, a lot of the microaggressions of people have said in this meeting, a lot of the day-to-day management, we see the challenges in diversity management, which I often refer to. And that's really about empowerment, education, support, and really looking at this and aligning it to our core business, which is patient care and patient experience. And if we get that element right, we get all the other elements right. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Kez, aligning it to the patient experience. Exactly that. This is not out with, this is because of us wanting to improve that. Thanks, Kez. I'm going to ask Christopher to ask the last question or to comment about his experience, and then we'll start to wrap up. Christopher. On mute. Sorry, do you want to unmute yourself, Christopher?
Oh, sorry about that. Actually, I didn't mean to speak, but because today is actually I'm on leave, but I thought that because I had this event in the calendar, I wouldn't miss it. I'm from Merseycare NHS Trust in Merseyside, Liverpool. My role is I'm an EDI advisor, the corporate division. Merseycare is a very, very large trust. We have probably around 12,000 or so employees or staff, because we cover the whole county, as it were. I think we have an anti-racist program that's been running since June last year, and I think the difference is it's been like launched on stages, but I think last year is one I would say that actually it has now come to being what it should be, to be anti-racist program, and it's a 3-year program, and at the moment it's on the stage of engaging awareness, educating people about what it is to be anti-racist. I think for the board, where they, I wouldn't say hit the nail on the head, it's that the board actually came out to make a strong statement about being anti-racist. It began with our chief executive who was there, the director of workforce was there, the medical director was there, and the director of nursing were there. So with those 4 executives making that statement, it became, I think, obvious that everybody else had to follow. And I think we have a team. It's not being delivered by EDI. It's being delivered by what we call effective organizational effectiveness team. I think other trusts call it organizational development team. So that way, I think it's strategic in that they're able to go to reach the wider teams in the network. So this team actually is holding sessions with various teams, and sometimes does, I think one of the workforce directorate, they do now have reflective practice sessions. I don't know the frequency, probably monthly frequency. And so I think it's going, but I see the main thing is that it's not really, it's uncomfortable as you would expect. The Northwest demographically is, we actually, people of color, a minority. So the workforce, the experience from the team, what they're saying is that the colleagues are saying, well, we are not racist. We've never done anything that is racist. Why should we have anti-racist training and the like? So these are questions that people have to come through that I deliver the course. And the issue of allies is also coming out to be very, very important, because initially, when we were the BEM network, the people who were working like in the HR or who were conscious about EDI positioned themselves as allies. But we know our network was saying, well, no, really, we want to develop allyship with the colleagues that work with us, especially like groups like in psychology were very, very active, and they didn't think about racism being should only be referred to within the trust, but also with other institutions that the trust works with, like the universities. They're talking about the schools of nursing, the psychology schools, to prepare people to work in an anti-racist environment. I think perhaps I would like the colleagues in our organizational effectiveness team to link up with for instance, Inyola, to get to share the experience of how far they're going. I don't want to praise them or to say they're not being effective, but they can talk with you about what they're doing.
Christopher, that sounds really good, and we'll get Eniola to contact you. I'm just really conscious of time and colleagues' time as they have to go, but I really appreciate you coming on during your day off. That's very dedicated, and it shows your concern for the subject. So thank you so much. I think I need to start wrapping up, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure. What I'd like you to do before you go is just I think put into the chat, please, what one thing will you take away from this session? What one thing will you take away from this session? Please answer the evaluation survey just before you go. Only take you a couple of minutes. And the main thing is just to sum up. I hope this occasion has given you a chance to reflect on race, to reflect on the conundrum that we found ourselves in, to seek to have some solace, I think, and some hope as people have shared their experiences, both at trust level, from the panel point of view, and a personal point of view. This is an ongoing job. It doesn't finish here. We want to encourage a hearts and minds change at NHS providers, the courage to speak up and talk about the issue. And I think Caroline Roberts put in the chat, normalising the conversation. I think that's absolutely key. So thanks for that, Caroline. And that's what we wanted to do here. And the last bit, accountability. It's got to work. There has to be impact. So it just leaves me to thank you. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you to our panelists, Paul, Kath, and Iola. It's been amazing, Tanya. We appreciate the feedback, and thank you, thank you. Please leave your comments. Have a good rest of your day.